Okay, I think we are live.
Nice.
Yeah. We're back. Well, I mean, if you can't see, we got an awesome guest with us. We got artist and writer Livio Ramondelli. Super excited for you to be here with us. I've been following your work for a while, so I'm super excited to be able to talk to you today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Just a bit. Yeah. Yep. Awesome. So do we just want to jump right into it? Okay, so I mean, figure we might as well start at the beginning. So, Livio, how did you get into comics? Like, have you been into them since you were a kid, or was it more of like a recent thing, or just
Yeah,
what's
no,
that
definitely.
story behind it?
Yeah, definitely since I was a kid. I grew up reading like the original Ninja Turtles, then like Jim Lee X-Men,
Yes.
Todd McFarlane Spider-Man. That was like my entry to comics. Then like in college, I got into like Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen and Preacher and the stuff that like more
Nice.
adult comics. And yeah, and
Yeah.
then professionally got to work on it later. Got to work on them professionally later, which is great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, did you also get into art and like drawing as a kid too, or was that like later?
No, same time. Yeah, I was drawing and reading comics at the same time as a kid, and trying to make my own comics that were terrible and that like never finished them. I would always like start a story and then get bored and want to do something else. So I have like all
Yeah.
these unfinished, stories when I was younger. But it was really good like training ground, like the discipline of making a comic takes a lot of time. And I think when you start young, you kind of build up that stamina to do it.
Awesome. So you mentioned Jim Lee and all that 90s stuff. So who would you say as artist-wise kind of influenced you in like your style and like to get going into art?
It's funny because like I love Jim Lee and Todd McFarlane. They were like two of my favorite artists, but my style isn't really, you can't really see any of their influence in it. Like but it's interesting though, because I still learn from them, right? But I think your style kind of evolves on its own. Like the first artist that made me inspired to do color was Alex Ross, where I got into like Marvel, Kingdom Come, like because I thought I would just be like a black and white penciler. I didn't think that I would do any painting or anything, but I read those and I thought it was fantastic stuff, and I liked how much atmosphere color can bring. You can add in lighting in a way that So yeah, and then when the Star Wars prequels came out, I was really interested in the design of those movies. So there's an artist named Ryan Church who was a concept artist on those movies, and he's still on The Mandalorian now. But he was like a digital painter, and at the early stages of that, when people were barely starting that, so I learned a lot from that about how you kind of light, environments, that kind of thing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So that yeah. Go ahead, Joy.
Oh man, of all time, I don't know. I mean, I think Jim Lee's definitely up there. Yeah, maybe Alex Ross for like how much impact that had on me.
Awesome.
I don't know. There's so many. Narrowing it down to just three it's tough. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. You just have to go through the whole list of everything. You can't pick just.
And then some are so different too. Like I really like Steve Dillon on Preacher and Tim Sale. I like guys that were like, they look very different than like a Jim Lee or whatever, but I love all their work.
Which your work definitely has a unique style to it. Like if I'm looking through covers, I'll be like, oh, that's a Livio cover.
Oh,
so
thanks.
to me, your covers, like kind of, you mentioned painting that you didn't think you would be doing. But to me, I know nothing about art and the technical side of it. But to me, they all look kind of like a painted style-esque. So what do you use for your art? Is like markers or like a certain kind of marker, or what exactly?
Yeah, it depends. Like on commissions, like when I'm doing originals for people, I tend to do them with Copic markers, that's kind of like the go-to brand.
Yeah.
And then I use like Micron inks. But with my comic book work, I tend to do pencil on paper, and then the colors are digitally done in Photoshop. So, so then
That's cool.
which I like, it allows a lot of freedom. So you can kind of you work in layers, so you can color on top of the line art and stuff. So I like doing that.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard of, well, I guess there is artists that do it, but like Photoshop being used for work. That's cool.
Yeah. That's like the go-to these days digital standard for stuff, because it's such a, they've done a really good job making it now. Like I have a digital tablet, so you just draw on a giant screen and it feels like traditional painting.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but you got your start professionally on Transformers for IDW. So how long have you been a Transformers fan? Again, was it as a kid, or was it just this was the opportunity I was given to work on?
I was a huge fan since I was a kid. I grew up on the 80s cartoon. That was like my go-to Transformers era. And then later on, I was lucky enough I got hired at Wildstorm. So Jim Lee became my boss, which was really funny. So and then that was so wild. It's still crazy. But then that led me to doing comic conventions. And when I was at Comic-Con set up at an Artist Alley table, this editor from IDW named Chris Ryle walked by, and they had the Transformers license. And he's like, and I had some Transformers art out there. And he gave me his card about working there. And and I got hired on Transformers. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, you hear lots of stories of artists like going to cons and then getting hired that way. So that's really cool.
It's insane. I mean, I recommend that to anybody who's looking to get into comics, is like get an Artist Alley table, and the networking. You never know who's going to walk up to your table. Like I had Guillermo del Toro walked up to my table one time. Like,
oh wow!
It was crazy. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So Transformers, again, seems like a big title to get your start on, and especially for a big Transformers fan. So how did it feel for you when like you first got the call, so to say? Like I bet you were super excited when they're like, "Hey, we want you for Transformers."
Yeah, it was wild. I mean, it was like, because initially I just did these two covers for them, and one was for the Best of Optimus Prime as trade paperback. So I got to draw my favorite character, and they were like, "Do whatever you want with it." So I was like, that was like heaven. I thought at that point I was like, man, if this is the only thing I ever do professionally on Transformers, that will still be really cool. And I didn't know it would be like another decade of work on it, but yeah, it was wild. It was really surreal too, because you end up meeting a lot of people involved in the cartoons and the movies and stuff. That's kind of a trippy experience too, that suddenly you're on the professional end of it, you know?
Awesome.
Yeah, it was definitely wild for sure.
So you mentioned Optimus Prime is one of your favorites. So who would you say is like your favorite Transformer, either like as a character in general or to draw and do art for?
I think it is still Optimus. I think like that character meant so much to me growing up, you know? And then it's like, I still really love drawing him. Other ones I like Devastator. I like Megatron. I like Shockwave. Like I'm a big 80s original cartoon fan, so those are the ones that I like, those designs, you know. I tend to like the more armored characters, the kind of like bigger, bulkier ones. So
awesome.
Yeah.
So with you saying you loved Optimus Prime or Optimus so much, were you devastated when the movie came out and they killed him off? Were you one of those kids that was so upset?
Yes, absolutely. I still find it hard to watch that scene. Like, I drew the cover for the Blu-ray of that movie a couple years ago. So that was also an amazing experience, because I grew up renting that movie as a kid. But I still, when I watch that scene, it hurts me. And I know he comes back too.
It's like my dad grew up watching the original show and the movie. So of course I watched it with him too. And every time we watched the movie, he would always mention how the first time he saw that scene, it was heartbreaking for him and so many other kids at the time. So,
that movie, I always say, is like one of the craziest war movies ever, because the opening 30 minutes, they kill so many beloved characters so violently. Like you watch that movie and it's like they had no idea how much those characters meant to people emotionally, and they're just like shooting them in the face, like straight up like annihilating them. It's unbelievable.
Or then it's like Ironhide's crawling on the ground and Megatron just blasts them in the face. It's like, if these weren't robots, this would be like rated R.
It's unbelievable, like the fire coming out of Prowl's eyes and the smoke. I mean, it's just crazy. It's wild.
So back to your work. over the next few years, you kind of continued to work on multiple Transformers miniseries, which I saw one was kind of like mixing Transformers with H.P. Lovecraft stuff. So I thought that was pretty cool because
yeah.
I love Lovecraft and thought that was a kind of weird but cool mixture to do. So I saw you also did some covers for Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica. So what was it like for you working on these other like franchises, but in comic book form?
It was really cool. I mean, like I'm a huge fan of both of those properties. So like, I think it's, you know, it depends. I've learned over the years that depending which company owns the characters, you'll have more or less freedom. So I think Lucasfilm was a little tighter in terms of the control,
of course,
which is fine because I understand they have a lot to, you know, they have a lot riding on it. But it was really great. I mean, anytime I get to work on something that I grew up with, like I also illustrated a couple Star Trek travel guides that were like, if you're going to visit Vulcan or whatever, here's where you would go and stay. And like, that was a blast too. Like anytime you get to work
with,
cool. Like work on properties you grew up with.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So now into your new work, you keep doing some awesome variants I keep seeing for bigger companies like Boom and Image for Magic and Something's Killing the Children. So I was wondering, what is the difference like working for these bigger companies and titles compared to IDW, which is still a pretty big company, but compared to Image, it's definitely not on the same scale.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because like, so Image is a bigger company, but they're not really a bigger like publishing, like their actual office is like not the size of IDW because IDW has more like there's titles they own themselves, whereas Image basically works with a lot of creators. So, you know, in terms of your involvement, it's like also with all the companies, you're just sort of dealing with editors and stuff through email. You know, you're not really actively in-house 9 to 5 at an office. So comics are interesting. You kind of draw it in a vacuum. You deal with people through email and then they get printed and sent out to the world. So, I mean, it depends, but generally everyone I've worked with has been really cool. I've had like really good experiences, you know, I think people just want to make good stuff.
Yeah, that's something as a comic fan I'm really interested in, is talking with creators and seeing the behind production of it, because, you know, just these books show up on the shelves at the shops and you don't really hear much about how it works in behind the scenes. So that's really cool to hear a little bit about that from you.
Yeah, it's cool on our end too, because we work on these things quietly at home. You know, drawing is a very isolated kind of world, and then you get to go to Comic Cons and you meet people in person and that have seen your work. So that's a cool experience.
Awesome. So for your work, do you have like a home studio that you kind of work in that you keep separate? Because with working from home, I know a lot of people like to keep a separate studio so they can separate home from work. So do you kind of have like a drawing station where you set up like some of your favorite works and everything to kind of keep you motivated? Or
we're in my studio now. So this room is my studio.
Awesome.
So this desk in front of me is where I draw, and I have a giant like monitor here that's on a kind of a mechanized arm thing, so I can swivel it around.
Okay.
So I like draw on it. It's pretty huge. Like it's the thing I've wanted my entire life, you know, which is like a really comfortable space because you sort of you're kind of hunched over, and you're, you know, the older you get, your back starts to not feel great. So but no, I like this room a lot because it's filled with nerd stuff and books that inspire me. And so like, and I think keeping a separate space is important. I think when you go out of this room, or when I go out of this room, then I know like, okay, I'm not in like work mode. When I'm in here, I'm generally in like work mode.
Awesome.
You know, that's a good question. It varies based on what I'm working on, right? So if I'm on an actual like Transformers book or whatever that has a deadline, kind of probably generally about 8 hours a day. But I like the flexibility of, you know, if there's some days I want to work at night, I'll just not work during the day. And you know, I think that's wonderful. That aspect of freelancing really agrees with me. Like I like working when you want to work. You know, I hated like, you know, waking up. And, So like
you get to choose your hours.
Yeah, it's awesome. And so I like that, you know, if I want to work till like 4 a.m. one night, I can. And I like that freedom a lot.
Awesome. So we have a question here from Terry. What's up in the chat? He's asking, what are some artists that you'd like to work with?
Oh, interesting question. I don't know. Well, in terms of artists, like, because I draw and color my own stuff, like, I don't know if we would work together. There's writers for sure I'd like to work with, you know, but I don't know. I mean, there's artists I admire a lot, like currently in comics. I think like Fiona Staples on Saga is really good. I like her stuff a lot. And I think Transformers has some really like Kay Zama, Andrew Griffith. There's some really good artists on the IDW books. Like, and I'm friends with them, and I think their work is really cool. So, yeah, I don't know. In terms of actually working with another artist, that would be interesting. Like, I have talked to some Transformers guys about like, I'll color something that they drew. We've talked about doing that at some point. So, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that would be cool.
What'd you say? Oh man, I'm embarrassed. I'm not really reading that much lately. The last thing I was reading was Batman '89, the first trade of that.
Nice.
Because I love that first movie so much, and I like that. Yeah. I kind of tend to read older stuff more these days, which is really unfortunate. Like,
fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of reread like this. These are all comics like here, and like those are like my favorite trades, and I kind of reread a lot of that stuff. Like I'll always go back to like Dark Knight Returns. Like I love reading that book.
Of course.
I was reading when Tim Sale passed away. I was reading Long Halloween. It's like that. Yeah, that had a huge impact on me.
That's such a classic story. Yeah.
Yeah, there's been a lot of bad losses in comics of guys I love. Like I also love George Perez passed recently. Did you ever read Future Imperfect, that Hulk story he did?
Yeah.
I love that book. Yeah.
Yeah. One of my favorite like 2-page spreads is Maestro's trophy room, and you see all the different things from the heroes, like broken Cap's shield and all that stuff. It's such an awesome page with so much detail in it.
I love it. I think that had such an inspiration on me, like because it was like this ultimate post-apocalyptic story, and I love the Easter eggs of what happened to all the characters. Yeah. There's a new Maestro statue coming. Have you seen it? It's like
I don't think so.
I just saw like this week, but he's on like a throne of those trophies, and so it's like,
oh, that's awesome.
Silver Surfer's board, and it's like the Venom Carnage symbiote, or in like glass cases. Yeah. It's so cool. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So now in your work, it seems that you're really focused on your own series, The Killock, which you wrote and drew yourself entirely. So, I mean, I could talk about it, but I'm sure you can describe it to the people watching better. So can you tell us a bit about the series and what it's like to write and draw your own series compared to these other companies' IPs?
Yeah, it's been a great experience because when you create your own property, you can do whatever you want with it. You can kill the characters, you can do whatever you want. So the freedom of that is great, and it's really unexpected of what you can take with it, where you take it. The premise of it is it's sort of like an R-rated Pixar movie, I always say, where it's like it's 4 robots who are from very different parts of their society, and they're linked together where if one of them dies, they all die. And so that's the nature of it. They're sort of on the run looking for a cure.
Awesome. So I think we lost Joey, but
no.
We'll keep on going and see if he comes back.
Sure.
So well, you mentioned with the different societies and stuff within the Killock, it's such a huge universe because there's multiple planets and everything. So what was it like for you? Because I can't imagine coming up with the creative parts and all those ideas and everything. So what was it like for you, and like how did you kind of come up with these ideas? Like, did you sit there and think about it, or would it just randomly pop into your head and then you'd write it down? Like, how did you come up with this world?
That's a really good question. I think it's like you start with a general idea, or at least I did, where I had the premise of 4 characters from very different walks of life that were going to be put together, and then it's like, hey, he's back. What's up? Yeah, I think it's like you put the characters together, and then you build out the world from there. Where you're like, okay, if it's a robot society, what would their planets look like? Would they have a party planet? Or would they be all business? That kind of thing. So. Yeah. I think you sort of start with a basic idea, and then you build out and expand. And then even the sequel series, that also builds out this world and kind of expands more of the mythology.
So how long did it take you, asking a lot of how long questions, how long did it take you, though, to like come up with the, like you were, so did you have this idea and come to, the boss man with it? Or did you say, I want to do my own thing? Let me sit here and let me figure out what I want to do.
Yeah, it was with Killock, it was unusual because I actually finished the entire series on my own, like fully colored and everything.
Oh, really?
And then I pitched it, which is not the way you should do it, because someone could say no. But I was just really into working on it, and I worked on it around all my other published stuff. So like for it to actually come out and get a nice response was really, really great. And and it just really meant a lot to me. Like I really, it was a nice project to chip away at over the years. And I'd be out with friends. We'd be at like a bar or something. I'd get an idea and I'd email it to myself. So I like remember the next day. Yeah. And then that process went on for, making the whole thing. So yeah.
Neat.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that kind of goes into the next question, but from a production side of things, like, so you wrote and drew everything out and then you had to pitch it. So how long would you say it went from like pitch to being printed? Because like, I feel like with you working for them, they would kind of want to get your stuff out too, because you're a big name working for them.
Yeah, it's a good question. So that's one thing is you're sort of dependent on scheduling, where I think from us signing the agreement to it being out in stores was maybe a year. It was a while because I remember because you have to sign a contract, you have to go back and forth and make sure it's all ironed out.
Legal stuff.
Yeah, and then it's like, and then it has to go into their pipeline for being released because there's only a certain amount of books that they can put out every month. So that's one thing I learned too is like there's an advantage to self-publishing too, because if you self-publish through like one of the online platforms, you can upload as much content as you want all the time. So, there's the benefit of going with a big company, and then there's also the benefit of doing it yourself. So it sort of goes back and forth.
Cool. So we got another question from Terry. Did you have any experience in writing prior to Killlock, or was this like your first writing project?
Yeah, thank you, Terry. It was my first professional writing for sure. I liked creative writing a lot, when I was younger. And then I wrote a little bit on Transformers. There was like a couple lines I would like add in, to the writing, and then the writers would add it in. But in terms of something of this scale, Killlock was definitely the first thing.
Awesome.
It's a good question. I think the writing is really fun because you can literally write. There's this joke this writer I know at IDW does where he says that, the writer just writes the fleets engage, and then an artist has to draw thousands of ships fighting. So it's like, there is that.
Yeah.
The writing is fun because you can just literally whatever you want to have happen happens. And then the hard thing about drawing comics I found is that if you're like filming a movie and you're shooting in like a diner, the environment's always there no matter where you're aiming the camera. The building's finished. But in a comic book, every panel you have to redraw where they are,
Right.
So there's a lot of kind of thankless comic work that like not even the big fight scenes or the memorable stuff, just people walking down a hallway. It's amazing how much work goes into that, So, yeah.
Cool. So you mentioned like artists or writers coming up with these big ideas and then the artists having to draw that. So has there ever been a time for you or that you've heard of where writers been like, I want this giant army, this giant battle, and the artist has been like, I just can't do it. That's too big. Like the scope is too huge.
There has been issues like that. There's also the issue of most writers I've worked with are really good with it, but occasionally there's just too much happening on one page, where you get a script and you're like, there's going to be 12 panels on this page just to get this stuff to happen. We have to cut, we have to cut some of this stuff out. So that definitely happens. And then thankfully, the writers you work with trust you. So if you edit something or when you do the layouts, you kind of simplify what was like 3 panels into 1 panel, like that happens. But yeah, it's tough because also, thankfully, I haven't had this experience myself, but I've had other people have this where there's writers that don't understand like what a shot actually is. So for example, it'll be like, they want to see the top of the Grand Canyon, but they also want to see like a donkey at the bottom. And it's like, you can't see those things at the same time, it's just, that's not how it works. So, but thankfully everyone I've worked with has a really good understanding of like, okay, we can't see the outside of like the USS Enterprise and then also see Captain Kirk in his quarters inside, but yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So getting back to Killlock and you creating all of these different characters and societies and classes. So within the Killlock, the world, there's these different classes of the robots, like the Wraiths, the Artisans, and all that. So, and they all have their different unique personalities, especially the main character ones that we follow throughout the story. So how did you come up with these characters, like personalities, and making them all different, but also fit together well?
Yeah, it was really important to me that they have really distinct differences, and I started with the fundamentals of, okay, I wanted like a really moral but violent soldier who's the Wraith.
Yeah. I
wanted the artisan who's like a psychopath, but he's also the smartest one. So I was trying to make, and then visually I wanted them to be very, very different. I wanted the Wraith to be tall and thick, and the artisan is like tiny and more mechanical. Like, So yeah, I mean, it was really that kind of thing. And then I think you keep layering their personalities over and over. You know, I think the more you work on them, the more you're like now working on the sequel too. It's like their voices feel a lot more natural to me because I've lived with them for a lot longer, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I do it.
Awesome. And so with the first series that came out was 6 issues and you had the classes, and then with the sequel series, Artisan Wraith, you expanded the world a lot and added a few more. So did you like come up with these new classes like back with the first series, or did you just kind of decide to add them in as you were writing the sequel?
I had like a rough idea of what else was around the world that I always knew, for example, like the sequel, if it happens, I didn't know if there was going to be a sequel at the time, that I wanted to see, okay, when you have a disaster, like the first issue ends, like what kind of security forces go in to take care of something like that, you know? So I knew that would be part of the sequel. And then I also knew like with the Wraith and like his army, I really wanted to see who leads that army. And so that there's like a trio of characters that show up in the sequel that are the leaders of that legion. So I think I'm a big fan of expanding the world like that. That I think that's what the best sequels do. You know, I think like if you think of like Empire Strikes Back or like Godfather Part 2, those movies are really great for not just they move the characters forward, but they also give you huge things about the past. You know, so like I like that stuff a lot. I think that's like what a proper sequel does is it pushes things forward, but it fills in giant chunks of what came before.
Awesome. Yeah, so I think that's partly why I love this Killock series so much, because I'm a huge fantasy fan too and love like J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings stuff. And a lot of those fantasy series, they really focus on the world building and just creating these giant new worlds and universes. So you're doing a very similar thing, but like an intergalactic planet-wide thing with this series. So I think that's partly why I enjoy it so much. And as you're talking about it, it's cool to hear you talk about from the creative point of view how you came up with this stuff. So
that's awesome.
It's really
that's
awesome.
Great to hear. Nice. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of like just creativity in general and learning about people's different processes. Like, one of my favorite things is I like listening to audio commentaries on movies, and I like listening to why choices were made. You know, so I've learned a lot about that.
Awesome. So the last issue of the second Killock series comes out this Wednesday. So when you started Killock, did you plan to have multiple series, or did you think it was just going to be a one and done thing?
I really hoped that there would be more. I didn't know because I didn't know if people were going to like the first one. So I made the first one end in a way that if it was only ever going to be those 6, that hopefully the ending would be satisfying. But I really liked that world, and I really wanted to kind of do more with it. So thankfully, like we're here now, and so the second one's about to wrap up this week.
Awesome. So when you came up with this Killock thing, did you expect, did you expect there to be the 2 sequels and maybe even continuing on in a third? If you can tell us, do you have plans for maybe a third goal or whatever, like another series to happen after this one, if you're able to say?
The only thing I can say is I would like to do more. You know, I think I would like to do more with the world. And I also, the other thing I want to do with it eventually is like, I think the nature of the Killock, the actual punishment of like linking 4 characters together, that lends itself to see that happen to a bunch of different groups and like what their experiences were. So I wanted to see
you can switch up characters a lot.
Yeah. I thought it would be cool, like a Twilight Zone kind of series of like you see different people's, you know, adventures with it, you know,
like an anthology series.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I would like to do that.
Cool. So you mentioned when we were backstage that trade paperbacks are coming out. So there's trade paperbacks for the first series, and is there going to be for the second one for people that may have missed the single issues?
Yeah, there will be. The trade comes out, I think it's February, so it's a little bit of a wait, but the single issues are all available. You can get them digitally too. But there will be an eventual second trade. Cool. Yeah, and anyone listening who wants to read it, you can get it through Penguin Random House or Amazon, like the Killock, and then the sequels are also available there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So now kind of getting out of comics and want to get to know you more a little bit personally, I've kind of got a couple, what are your favorites type of questions just to get to know you more as like personally, like I said. So what is your favorite movie? And if you can't pick a specific one, just give us a couple of your favorites.
Okay, that one I know. Empire Strikes Back. So yeah, that's my favorite movie. Some of my other favorites. Yeah. I love Raiders of the Lost Ark. I love The Godfather. Blade Runner.
Nice.
Yeah, there's quite a few, but that's definitely Empire Strikes Back is by far my favorite. Yeah, RoboCop, also RoboCop.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, what is your favorite band, artist / genre of music that you're particularly a fan of?
I like Daft Punk a lot. I like Radiohead. I like that kind of stuff. Like I don't even know, not electronica. I don't know what you actually call it, but that's my favorite type of music for sure. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So with the music too, like when you're working, do you prefer like a quiet studio or do you have stuff playing in the background that you listen to while you draw?
I like stuff in the background on for sure. Like I like either music, like those like ambient render channels on YouTube. You ever watch those? Like I like those a lot.
Stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I love that stuff. Yeah, I love that. That's really cool. That's really conductive. I mentioned earlier like audio commentaries. I like listening to people and like learning about the process of making something while I'm making something. I find that really cool.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I don't like a quiet studio. I think it's the quiet's like too distracting for me. I actually like the noise.
Yeah. Awesome. So what would you have to say? Again, you can have multiple answers, but your favorite comic book character from any company or universe?
Man, that's a tough one. Maybe Batman, because I think the sheer volume of great Batman stories.
Yeah.
Like I was talking to a friend about this the other day. We were saying that there's like 10 amazing Batman trade paperbacks, but like I love Spider-Man as a character, but there's not like a definitive Spider-Man trade, which is really weird. Like, I find that very strange. Like there's great runs of Spider-Man, there's a great, 50 issues in a row, but I think Batman just lends itself to just really great kind of self-contained stories,
Yeah. Because when you think about Batman, like all the big series, like Dark Knight Returns, Year One, Long Halloween, it's all these like mini-series, almost story arcs that are self-contained. So you don't really, like you said with Spider-Man, it's a lot of those creator runs, but not really self-contained stories.
Yeah, like Marvel, I find works that way in general. Like it's kind of same with X-Men too. It's like there's not really a definitive X-Men like trade. I mean, maybe like Dark Phoenix Saga or something, but generally the runs are really good. But the actual like, if I want to read something, cover to cover, it's different, which is funny because I don't even think that's intentional. That's just the way Marvel and DC sort of evolved.
Yeah.
But yeah. Although I will say, ironically, I think Daredevil has several really good trades. Like
yeah.
Yeah, I love one. That's true.
Yeah, that's the big one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
yeah. Yo, actually, what I thought was really good was I wish they would still made it was the Ultimate line, the Ultimate Spider-Man, Ultimate X-Men. I thought that was like that was sort of geared toward a trade, and then like that was a great way as a jumping on point for new people who were like they should do that again. I thought that model worked really, really well.
Yeah, we got some like fan favorite characters from that. Like Miles Morales is now a huge character in the main Marvel universe. So
yeah, and then their version of Nick Fury too. Like Sam Jackson comes from Ultimate.
I love that. How I forget who the artist is, but he was like, I based Nick Fury off of Samuel L. Jackson, and then for the movies they went and got him to play Nick Fury. So I think that's kind of cool.
That was so funny because it's like you could see it going wrong where Sam Jackson's like, I'm going to sue them for using my likeness, and instead it's like everyone makes a lot of money. So yeah. And have you ever read that comic book?
What's up?
Oh, nice. Have you guys ever read that comic book Wanted, the Mark Miller book?
No, but I've heard of it.
It's funny. So they eventually made a movie with Angelina Jolie and Morgan Freeman. But if you read the comic, it's so clearly Eminem and Halle Berry as who they were drawing. And that was when Eminem, like you could see him maybe doing that movie. Like, but it's funny how when that works. Yeah.
Well, because Eminem's a huge comic fan too, so that would kind of be cool if he was in a comic book movie.
I didn't know that about him, but that makes a lot of sense because I was listening to the Venom song he did for the movie, and I was like, there's lines in that I'm like, you only know that if you've read Spider-Man. Like, he uses terms like calling the symbiote a suit. I'm like, That's you only call it that if you've read the books. Like that was really cool. Like
or like even in a lot of his older songs too, he makes references to like Thor and Asgard and stuff. So I just think that's kind of cool.
Oh, does he? I don't think I knew. I've listened to his older stuff. I didn't know that. Oh, huh. That's awesome.
So getting back to you and your work, what's up, Droid? Oh yeah. We got a question here from, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, but what would be your favorite comic ever if you had to pick like an issue, I guess?
It probably is The Dark Knight Returns. Like, I think Dark Knight Returns is such a great comic and such a great even though there are sequels, I think it works as like perfect, like Batman story. And you could argue it's like the final Batman story. That's probably my favorite ever. I love Why the Last Man a lot. I like Preacher, Watchmen. Like, those are probably my favorites. Nice. Yeah.
Awesome. So getting back to you and your work, you do a lot of commission work, which I got an awesome Megatron piece, which I got to say thank you enough for it, because I messaged you and I was like, hey, I have this idea for Megatron with the comic book Infinity Gauntlet. And you were like, awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely do that.
I love it.
I'm a huge fan of, I'm a huge Thanos fan, love the Infinity Gauntlet saga. So I want to get commissions from different artists of their villains that they draw with the gauntlet. I think that would be a cool like art collection to have. So with your commissions, you do a different style than your regular art. It's kind of like you do the outline and then kind of shade in the color, which I think is really cool. So it's not like solid blocks of color. Like, again, like I mentioned, I know nothing about the technical side of art. So if you could maybe talk about that a little bit more and like what made you decide to do that besides being easier to draw commissions quicker.
Yeah. Well, first, I also love Infinity Gauntlet. I think that's a great series. And that's one of my favorite fights ever, is when Thanos just like demolishes them. I love that fight. In terms of the commissions, so like my comic book work, my published work is drawn like pencil and paper and then Photoshop colors. So it's digitally colored. The commissions, because they're a traditional piece of art that's going to go to collectors. It's just more traditional in general. So it's like ink and pencil, and then I use markers for the coloring. It creates a different feel because you're getting an original, fully colored thing. But the actual technique is not that different from the comics, except the only thing that Photoshop allows that traditional markers don't really allow is that you can kind of layer on lighting and gradients and stuff. And in Photoshop, it's very easy to do. In comic books, that's harder. That's more of kind of like a watercolor or like a painting, acrylic painting kind of effect.
Awesome. Which, if you guys watching, I highly recommend you go and check out Livio on Instagram. He's always posting his commission work, and there's some incredible pieces and I got to say too, your pricing for commissions was some of the best I've ever seen. Like, it matched really well to what you get in the end. So I highly recommend getting some work from you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's the pricing's weird because you want to be fair, but you also want to have it worth your time, So I try and be fair to people.
Yeah. So now I think we're coming up to the end. Got last two questions here for you. Unless anybody else in the chat has some, just pop them in and we'll pull them up. So a lot of your work has been on these more indie titles. So if you got the chance to work for Marvel or DC, what would be your dream character or team to write or draw?
Oh man, that's a good one. I am a big X-Men fan, and I love like Apocalypse and Magneto. I love those characters a lot. I think some kind of cool apocalypse story, like Egyptian sci-fi, I think would be up my alley, and I think that would be really fun to do. We were talking about Future Imperfect earlier. Like, I love that, like a Dark Hulk kind of story. Doctor Doom. I kind of tend to lean more toward the villains, I guess. And then at DC, like Batman would probably be my go-to. So those would be, cool. And then even outside of superheroes, like I think a RoboCop story would be really fun to do. So yeah.
And so you mentioned you like the darker stuff, and especially with the Kill Lock, it's a lot darker series. So would you kind of like want to do a series like Dark Knight Returns, where it's a darker take on some of these like classic superheroes that were a little bit more kid friendly in the past, but then doing a more adult take on them?
Yeah, I think so. Like, I like kind of like Future Imperfect and Dark Knight Returns. I like the post-apocalyptic feel of like, you know, it's far in the future and you're kind of catching up to where all the characters were. Like I liked Old Man Logan a lot too, where it's like seeing, you know, what happened to the Marvel universe, like where is everybody?
Yeah.
So yeah, that would probably be I'd be interested in that, I think, more than just a, you know, normal status quo kind of story.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, final question. I've asked our few guests in the past this. What is one piece of advice you would give to somebody who wants to start drawing or writing, either just on their own or hoping to get into comics?
Good question. I got two bits of advice. One, I would say, is like a personal piece of advice, is to actually finish the stuff that you're making for a lot of reasons. I mean, I think we all get discouraged and we let projects kind of fall through, but if you actually finish something, that puts you so far ahead of most people. And the feeling of finishing it is wonderful too. Like finishing the Kill Lock was a wonderful experience. The other bit of advice I would say is more of a professional dealing with other people thing. And that is to take it seriously. Like if someone gives you a chance, make your deadline, you know, take drawing and writing as serious as you would take any other job, you know, like even though it's fun and, you know, it's kind of a dream job, there's a lot of people really riding on you to make sure you get your work done on time. So that's what I would say.
Awesome. So hopefully if there's anybody listening now or going to watch this on the rewind that wants to get into art and writing, definitely take that advice. That's some awesome stuff there.
Cool.
So I guess now we're at the end. Thank you for coming on the show, Livio. It was awesome to talk to you about some of my favorite projects that you've worked on. So before we go, though, do you want to tell the people where they can find you and some projects you have coming out and where to find your work?
Yeah. First, thank you for having me. It was great to talk to you guys. Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. I'm probably the most active. I generally post once a day on there. My Twitter also, both of them are just my full name. Yeah, and then that's really it. Instagram, you can contact me if anyone wants a commission. You're free to DM me there or email me. And yeah, that's where I'm at.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. And
Thanks
remember,
so
Kill Lock issue 6 coming out tomorrow, and the trade sometime in February. So definitely pick those up. I highly recommend this series.
Nice. Thank you so much.
Well, without further ado, I guess we'll see you guys next time. If I can get to the end here. See ya.